Hi, everyone. I'm Connie Ryan. I'm the Executive Director of Interfaith Alliance of Iowa, and this is What's Happening. I am so glad that you have joined us today to have another conversation with some great leaders from our state. What's Happening is our weekly online forum where we talk about just a broad spectrum of issues and always have a lot of good guests to be part of the conversation. If you want, you can put comments in the comment section, and we're glad that you have joined us. Our nation really has been struggling and coming to grips with our history and our the impact of that history of race and racism. And there really has come this time in our country's nation or our country's time of being. And it just, I'm sorry, I'm stumbling over words because I don't exactly know how to come to grips with all of this. But what Interfaith Alliance has done is created conversation around race and racism with a bunch of faith leaders have been very faithful in the conversation over the last year. And in that conversation, there have been a couple of projects that have come to be, one of which is talking about elections, especially local elections, and making sure that the conversation is happening with candidates around issues of race and racism and what has become known as divisive concepts, all of those pieces. And then the other piece is tackling the 1619 project, which is a curriculum and really just writings that the New York Times put out. And we decided that we wanted to explore that piece, the 1619 project, through the lens of faith, excuse me. And so we created these projects through the Faithful Voices for Racial Justice project that we do on a regular basis, and faith leaders really having conversations about those things. So I have with me 4 folks who have been really an important piece of those conversations in creating those projects. I have Reverend Dr. Jacqueline Thompson, Reverend Rob Johnson, Reverend Erica Youthy, and Reverend Alex Thornburg, all of which have been part of the conversations of Faithful Voices for Racial Justice and those 2 projects that I talked about. So I'm going to invite them into the conversation and really to talk about Faithful Voices for Racial Justice, but more importantly, race and racism in our nation and the impact on communities of color, and the 2 projects that we are working on right now. So I'm going to start with asking them to tell just a little bit more about themselves briefly and the faith community that they are part of, and maybe why you chose to be part of the conversation through Faithful Voices for Racial Justice. And I'm going to start with, I apologize because I said I was going to do this ahead of time, but I'm going to start with Reverend Rob Johnson.
Hey, first of all, thank you, Connie, so much for allowing myself and others to be here and to join you all. I am honored to be amongst such great, astute pulpiteers that you have right here, who can exegese and exegese the text so much better than I can. And I'm just, as they would say, hyena happy and peacock proud. I would say that I am a part of this simply because it's an opportunity to stretch not only myself but also those around me. If you look at this call, if you look at who's on the screen, this is a microcosm of what the world looks like, of who we will run into, who we will be in contact with, minus a few older or younger people, or maybe even maybe even a different ethnicity. But in this case, we're looking at a situation where Black folks have been in this country, have been discriminated against, downtrodden, have been completely ridden out of policy. And what I mean by that is when you have policies that allow people to be sentenced to different things, when you have policy that doesn't allow for clean air to be over certain neighborhoods, when you have policy that allows people to be stopped and frisked, when you have policies that doesn't put grocery stores in certain neighborhoods, when you look at this policy conversation, that's the reason why I'm here. I'm here because we're able to come together and really look at how do we affect laws. People always say, oh, we need to contact the president or we need to contact this person. When honestly, this group is really focused on contacting those who truly affect laws, who can truly enact real policy that can create real change. And so that's why I'm here, because that's what this is about. When my children are born and when my niece and nephew grow up, they will not just be impacted by my words, but they will be impacted by the policies that we've changed. And that's why I'm here today.
Thank you, Rob. I'm going to go to Erica Youthy next. Tell us a little bit about yourself and why you wanted to be part of the conversation of Faithful Voices for Racial Justice.
Yeah, thanks, Connie. And like Rob said, thanks so much for having me on. I am in the best of company here. My name's Pastor Erica Youthy. I am the Director for Evangelical Mission and Assistant to Bishop Current in the Southeastern Iowa Synod of the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America. It is a long title, but it basically means that I get to work with 138 congregations in Southeastern Iowa in the ELCA denomination. And I am here because after George Floyd was murdered and we saw the marches and we saw the action in the streets, it was not long-lived necessarily publicly. But for me personally, it was a moment of remembering being a little girl when Rodney King was beaten and those films came to light. And I sat down with my own girls who were about the same age that I was at the time and thinking, my God, nothing has changed. And I couldn't bear that anymore. And so was connected with this group of faithful leaders and have been both learning from my siblings of color. I have been challenged. I have been, doing a lot of self-reflection and figuring out how we as white people in this culture today can actually use our privilege to affect change, to bring about true justice for our siblings of color. So it has been a good year of learning, and I'm so privileged to be here and to continue this work together.
Thank you, Erica. I'm going to go to Reverend Jackie Thompson next.
Good morning, and again, I love Rob throwing the light on others because I'm going to throw it right back on him. It's just a privilege to be, on my screen. I'm right next to him, so hello, Rob. And then Alex and Erica, and I have utmost respect for Connie and what Interfaith Alliance of Iowa does in our community. So I'm Jacqueline Thompson, and I am a United Methodist elder, and I am currently appointed as pastor to Burns United Methodist Church and also St. John's United Methodist Church. I like to tell folks that I begin my Sunday mornings at St. John's, which is an historically white congregation, and finish my Sunday morning at Burns, which is an historically Black congregation. And as a matter of fact, Burns has a storied history, 155 years. It is the oldest African-American congregation of any denomination in Iowa. And we are quite proud of the fact that we were founded as a congregation in 1866. So that is my role. I'm also a community activist. I've always been a community activist, even before I was clergy. I stand for public education. I stand for affordable housing. I stand for food insecurity, and I stand for racial justice. And I have to admit, after George Floyd died, and I received all these invitations to join conversation with my colleagues, about racial justice. I thought, here we go again. A lot of conversation, a lot of talk, and very little action. And I have to admit, I had to overcome my own skepticism before I actually joined the Faithful Voices. But I did because I felt like this was a group that might make some progress and might take some action in this. And again, I'm a kind of person, I put my money where my mouth is. I can't complain about something if I'm not doing something about it. And so I am here. I was part of the 1619 committee. We were actually started off as the Adult Learning Committee, and we were wailing and whining about people talking about the 1619 project, and they hadn't even read it. There's nothing worse than people talking. It's like people who talk about the Bible and they've read about 3 sentences of it. Stop. So I said, maybe what we should do is give an opportunity for people to read the project before they start at least if you've read it, you might badmouth it, but how can you badmouth it when you haven't read it? And so that was the action that we came to. We wanted to provide an opportunity for people of both spectrums, whether you're progressive, conservative, whatever you might call yourselves, to become familiar with the project, and then to speak from a learner standpoint, as opposed to just firing from the hip, or just saying what you're hearing in the newspaper or other people say. And so I just want to say I am just blessed to be here today. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Reverend Alex Thornburg.
So I'll echo what everybody said, and I feel honored to be on here with you, Connie, and Rob, and Jacqueline, and Erica, and I'm very grateful to be part of this conversation. So I think for reasons theological and personal, I've always been challenged and have reflected a lot on racism and race. I am pastor at Heartland Presbyterian Church, I should say that, located in Clive. And though I've been predominantly a pastor of predominantly white churches, I've always thought that racism has been the original sin of the church, and something we should be wrestling with, even though we may not want to, for that reason. I was trying to think what got me connected to the Faithful Voices, and I think it was, in many ways, it was watching what happened to George Floyd. And I don't know if it was because we were trapped in our homes with COVID. I don't know what it was. We were forced to look. I'm not sure, but it was watching that unfold, and what struck me was the nonchalant brutality of it. That really shocked me. Maybe I shouldn't have been shocked. But it really shocked me. And I felt a deep desire, and because of invitations from Interfaith Alliance, that I needed to connect with other people of faith, to share my lamentations, to share my anger, my fear, my uncertainty, and also to connect to those conversations to find some hope. And that's been of great value to me, is this community, even though we've never met in person, but finding this community every week that really takes this seriously and reflects on it. And I learned so much to be a part of it.
Thank you to all 4 of you for that. I'm going to throw this out first to Erica, and then others, please do chime in. Why do you think it's important for faith communities to be involved in the conversation around racism, racial justice, and the particular role of faith communities in that?
Yeah, thank you. What an important question. And the short answer is the gospel. Coming at this from a Christian perspective, we have been set free in the love, life, death, and resurrection of Jesus. And that freedom is both blessing and responsibility for us to work towards justice. And when our siblings of color are not free and do not experience the same rights and are not sentenced. Rob mentioned that they're not sentenced the same way. They don't have the same access to the things that white people have access to. This is a gospel issue. And it is our call as people of faith, grounded in love, to work for that justice. And I know that there have been a lot of pastors and leaders in congregations, particularly in predominantly white congregations, that are getting pushback on this. And dear friends, this is where we stand. Martin Luther famously said, "Here I stand." And so here we are standing together, offering this call to all people to join us in this work.
Thank you, Erica. Others that want to chime in on that, why faith communities have a particular responsibility to be part of the conversation and part of the work?
I preach quite often that we are to see Christ in everyone, that everybody is made in God's image. And it bothers me sometimes when we look down and look through people, whether they, and I mean, I can tell you this happens to me as a woman, not often because I'm tall, so it's hard to look down on me, but there's a way for it to be done, to look past someone who is of a different ethnicity or who has an accent, or who might be, I don't know, mumbling to themselves. And one of the things that I feel as people of faith is that when we look at and read the Bible, Jesus always spoke and took time to be with those that others just passed by. And I just feel that when we talk about racism, that's what we're talking about. Taking the time to listen, to form a relationship, to take an interest. You know, you may not be able to come to conversations. You may, here you go. I don't have any Black friends, that whatever the reason might be. But for some reason, in the middle of a desert, walking along a sea, Jesus found people that were different than him. And I live in Des Moines. You just cannot live in Des Moines and not run across people that are outside your circle. And I believe that is what we are called to do as people of faith, to stop and take a moment of our time with people that we might not ordinarily speak to or be with, and see Christ in them.
There's a famous story about a German theologian following World War II in which he was reflecting on the failure of the German church to respond to what happened to the Jews. And one of his statements was, maybe we shouldn't have confessed so much Jesus as Lord as much as we should have confessed Jesus was a Jew. And I've always heard that, and I think the challenge today is, what is the church going to confess? Are we going to confess Jesus was a person of color? Are we going to confess? And some people would find this really challenging. I think it's an important theological statement. Black lives matter. Is that what we're called to confess in this moment? So I've always been haunted by that. The church will often fail to confess what's most important in its particular time and its particular context.
Rob, do you want to chime in?
I wasn't going to say much, just simply because I feel like everything's been said. I just want to mention this, is that I read a news article today that according to the report, that last year, 4 Black women and girls, according to the numbers, were murdered per day. Per day. 4 Black women and girls were murdered per day last year, according to how the numbers work out. And so if we ask the question on why the church should be involved, it's because we're the ones burying them. We're the ones giving the eulogies. We're the ones that is simply standing over there professing to the family over a deceased loved one that everything will be all right. To love them like Christ loved the church, and to have faith and give grace and find forgiveness in your heart. This is what we're telling people. But yet they leave that church never to return, to go home, to live with the grief that they now have to suffer with for the rest of their lives. And so if we are to be involved, and I use the word if purposely, that if we are to be involved, then we need to be involved. And that means that we don't just show up at the funeral, preach a good eulogy, and then let the family go home. But that means that we figure out a way, like these people, like us here on this call, to get involved in that community. To not just be a eulogist, but to be an activist, like Dr. Thompson said. To speak to those like Reverend Erica said. To be in that moment, like Reverend Alex said. So if we gonna do something, and this is really more so of a charge to the church, if we're going to be involved with the community, then by God, be involved. I'm tired of going to funerals and they can't find nobody to preach the service because nobody wants to step up to help these families. And it don't matter whether you black, white, or Hispanic, Asian, or Indian. It doesn't matter your ethnicity. At the end of the day, when somebody dies, they're looking for somebody to give them a eulogy. They're looking for a church to bury them at. They're looking for a funeral home. And if we gonna do this, then let's do it. Let's not half-step it. Let's get out there and let's really be there. Because a year from now, when they remember the laugh of their loved one, they're gonna need help. I can keep going, but I'm gonna stop there.
Thank you, Rob. Thank you, each of you. And so we began a conversation this summer about how to take action in a different way. And as Jacqueline talked about in one of the groups through Faithful Voices for Racial Justice, began talking about the 1619 Project and all the controversy around that and pushback on using it as curriculum in our schools. And so that conversation was happening simultaneously in a different small group. There was conversation about local elections and how we can help to inform the public, educate voters on candidates and where they stand on race and racism and associated issues. And so I'm going to have, so Jacqueline and Erica were part of the 1619 Project conversation. Rob and Alex were part of the conversation around elections and informing voters. And so I'm going to start with Jacqueline and Erica. If the two of you would just kind of describe that project and where it is now, and how people can be connected to that. And either one of you, whomever wants to start with that.
Reverend Jacqueline, I'm not sure. I think you were pointing at yourself there. Well, you know, as Jackie said, we were a little bit moany, groany, complainy earlier this summer when some of the legislation was being passed, talking about banning the teaching of the 1619 Project in our schools. And her activist came out even in our own group. And I remember there was one day where she said, "You cannot lose hope now." And so we took that to heart, and out of this group, the idea to create an interfaith conversation with the lens of faith about the 1619 Project was born. And it was not just Reverend Jackie and I, there were a couple of other ones, Reverend Meg Wagner and Pat Shipley, and of course Connie, have put together now a 6-week curriculum. It is being built live. Our first inaugural week was last Monday. You can watch every Monday at 6:30. I'm sure there will be a link that you can check this out, but there are different pieces of the essay assigned each week. There's the link. Thank you. Different pieces of the essay that you can read and then watch faith leaders engaging in topic. And then there are also questions and prayers available if you want to study this with a group of people. Suggestions about how we can, again, as people of faith, take up the issue of race and racism and what we can do about it in order to continue to work for justice.
Awesome. Thank you. Reverend Jackie, you want to add anything to that with the project? And
I will add that. So every Monday for these 6 sessions, you will find the voices of different leaders. So it's not just the same, talking heads every week. And we have been very intentional about making sure that these are interfaith leaders. Not all of them are pastors, for example. Not all of them are Christian. And the whole idea is to make this a conversation where many voices of the community can be heard. And so I would really encourage you to come to wrap yourself around this. And believe it or not, it's virtual and it's free. So
That is right. And I'm excited for the conversations. As Erica said, we began last week, and that really was just a conversation about how to hold difficult conversations and some tools and covenant and things that you can do, particularly in small group, to be able to have good and fruitful, open and honest, difficult conversations. And so I'm excited for that project and to have that be available to anyone. So it is available on YouTube. As Erica said, the first one is up, and you can watch that at any point in time. And then each week we will add another conversation, another layer of that through November 8th. So excited for that project. Then on the other team that was working on a project was this idea of informing voters, educating voters on issues of race and racism, where candidates stand, asking candidates specific questions. And Alex and Rob, do you want to talk a little bit about that project, how it came to be, and some of the details of that? And again, I'll let you all battle over who starts first.
I'll let age go before beauty.
No, that's why you're going first, right?
Hey, for those who are watching, Alex is my friend. I absolutely love him. The conversations we have are far beyond what one can see with the natural eye. But really, when we talk about elections and we talk about, I've been gone for a few of those sessions, but when we really talk about this, it's about making sure that we're getting the right type of paperwork in people's hands so that they are registered to vote. At the end of the day, what we realize is that we have communities, particularly of color, who have been technically really left out of the process. When we go to these communities, we try to make sure that we're bringing them information to be registered to vote. Last year, there was this huge effort around the state of getting certain communities that were under a certain number of income to get them registered to vote, because there was a correlation between what was happening in communities that were considered below poverty level and their election rate numbers. And what we found is that those who were below this poverty number were not coming out to vote, mainly because they had so much on them. They were working 2 or 3 jobs, children, trying to pay bills. They were doing all of these things. And so the efforts were to try and help get the information to these groups and these organizations, whether it's using churches as an opportunity for them to come hear from these candidates, using churches as a place to go register to vote, using pastors to go out to these communities during the day to knock on doors and get folks registered to vote. And then not only that, but then educating people on voting, because that's what we have to do. People are asking their school board member stuff that they should be asking their county supervisor. People are asking their state legislator things that they should be asking their mayor. And so we're trying to make sure that folks are educated across the board on what does voting look like. We got to make sure, and we can't just assume, oh, just educate yourself. We can't just assume that people have the resources or the knowledge or the understanding to go and just educate themselves. So somebody has to step out there and be the teacher. And that's what I love about the efforts of what's been going on, is that we are looking to teach the teachers so that then we can then make disciples who will make disciples who will make disciples. Reverend Alex, your turn.
So I think we find conversations about race, particularly in public forums like candidate forums, very hard to do. And so often we avoid asking and having those conversations, and that's to the detriment of ourselves and to our communities. And so part of what Faithful Voices was encouraging churches, don't shy away from this conversation. And if have a candidate forum, which might cover a variety of issues, but have a candidate forum so people can have these conversations. And then in the conversations, maybe minds are shaped a little bit different. Maybe ideas are shared. Conversation is community. And so we have encouraged congregations, if there's not a candidate forum in your area, in your school district, host one and try to model for those around us ways to have conversations on difficult, challenging issues. And we have a lot of them, but how to do it in a way in which the community is built up and understanding is achieved. And we know where people understand where people are coming from and what policies they'll pursue. So some of the questions might be about, what do you feel about learning about the Project 1619? Or what do you think about as a candidate in the school board? What do you think about having a diversity person on? And again, it's not looking for a particular answer, but really getting an understanding of where people are coming from and how they understand these issues and how their understanding will shape how they'll vote on policies. So, unfortunately, political debate these days has become lobbing bombs at each other. And I think the real attempt here was to really try to have a conversation and communicate and understand each other and encourage that to continue forward.
Thank you, Rob. Thank you, Alex. And I think that one of the most important things that anyone can do is to ask those questions, whether you have a forum or not, but ask those questions of candidates as you are determining who you're going to vote for. And we are a nonpartisan organization. School board elections are nonpartisan. City council elections are nonpartisan. But it is critically important at the local level that we understand who we're voting for, what they believe, if they are running for the common good of the community, or if they're running for an ideological agenda item to be pushed through. And so asking these questions, having the conversation, diving in deep, asking open-ended questions that provide that opportunity for further engagement, so critically important. And so I'm grateful for that work. And I'm so grateful for the work of the team that put together the project with the 1619 project. So it's called Faithful Conversations about the 1619 project. And that is such a valuable tool. That will remain. So the next election is local election November 2nd. So be sure to find who is running in school board elections, who is running for your city council, and ask some of those questions. The 1619 project Faithful Conversations about the 1619 Project will remain up on our website, and the tools will remain up there and on YouTube. So really anyone can access that tool, those resources ongoing, whether it is during this time frame from last week to November 8th, or whether it is beyond that, and would encourage folks to do that. My one, I guess, probably final question to all of you is, in these conversations, since we began Faithful Voices for Racial Justice this summer after George Floyd was murdered, and we've all been kind of in and out of the conversation and doing other things in our communities, in our houses of worship, etc. But what have you learned about yourself in all of this? What have you learned about yourself in all of these conversations, particularly joining in conversation with other faith leaders? What have you learned about yourself? And I'm going to start with Reverend Alex Thornburg.
That's a great question. What I've learned about myself is how little I know, how much I don't know. I was going to share. My wife was born and raised and grew up in Tulsa, Oklahoma. And it wasn't until she went to college that she ever heard about the worst race riot that ever occurred in Tulsa, Oklahoma in the 1920s. I would say a growing awareness of how little I know and humility about that. I am humbled by the wisdom of my brothers and sisters who come from many different denominations, persons of color, and I'm humbled in that conversation and learning so much. So what I think that's what I've gotten most out of it was how dumb I really am.
Reverend Jacqueline Thompson, what have you learned about yourself in all of this?
Erica mentioned earlier how I kind of brought to our committee the fact that we need to remain hopeful. And I think that's what wants to be stolen from us. People want us to give up hope. They want to take that out of the equation. And we, as faithful people, realize that no matter what, no matter how bad things get, and they get bad and have been bad and maybe might even get worse, but we have hope that one day there will be peace. You know, that justice will roll down, that peace will flow like a river. We have that promise from God, and I think we need, and I need, I need to remain hopeful that God is out ahead of us, clearing a path, and that one day we shall overcome.
Awesome. Thank you. Reverend Erica Youthy.
Yeah, I learned that I am late to the game, but that it is never too late. And that through listening and learning, I have this power and privilege, as we all do, and learning how to use it in productive ways that build up the whole community has been really invaluable to me. And I'm so grateful to have been sitting at the feet of these amazing saints week in and week out, learning and hearing about hope and the way that our collective action can continue to make a difference.
Thank you. And Reverend Rob Johnson.
I would say, so my mother, growing up in Chicago, my mother would say there's a difference between being professional and being genuine, being authentic. And she says, when you just allow your authenticity to show, people will decide whether they like you or not based upon that, not based upon you being able to be professional. And what I learned is that we all, myself included, have to learn to walk in our authenticity. We have to learn to walk in our genuineness. And sometimes that comes with flaws, that comes with hurt, that comes with past trauma, drama, and experiences. But yet and still, we have to accept each other for who we are. And those who have decided to be better will know it because of their authenticity. And so, like these pulpiteers on the call today, we all have flaws. But yet, when we joined this group, excuse me, when we joined this group, we joined knowing that there will be opportunities for us all to grow in a way and stretch us in a way that we may not have been stretched, whether that's pushing a group of people that you don't know, that don't look like you, to understand a little bit of your life experience, or whether that's being honest with yourself and saying, hey, just maybe I have thought about this wrong for so many years. And so I learned to accept myself for who I am, but also to look for the authenticity in others.
Thank you for all of that. And thank you for each of you, your prophetic voices that you bring to the conversation and your commitment to the work. I am very grateful for the work that you did in these two projects, both the election project and the Faithful Conversations about the 1619 project. But I am just grateful for who you are and what you bring to the table each and every day to dismantle racism and address the issues of race and racism in our communities. Thank you so much. Thank you to those who are watching. We are grateful that you have spent this time with us. If you are new to Interfaith Alliance of Iowa, obviously, we are on Facebook and YouTube, but we are also on Twitter and Instagram, and you can find more information about us at our main website, interfaithallianceiowa.org, and you can find more about Faithful Voices for Racial Justice at faithful-voices.org. And again, thank you to Reverend Dr. Jacqueline Thompson, Reverend Rob Johnson, Reverend Alex Thornburg, and Reverend Erica Youthy. I'm grateful for the time that we have spent together. I should also say, as I do at the end of every broadcast, that please register to vote. And if you are registered to vote, please help somebody else to register to vote. This is a critical time in our nation's history. We need everyone to be part of the democracy and part of the process and to vote. And for now, please take care, stay safe, be well, and have a great week. Thank you.